Welcome to the Stickers on the Mic podcast, brought to you by StickerGiant.com, where we talk with our customers about how they started their business, how they're marketing their brand, and how they're growing their company. Without further ado, it's time for the Stickers on the Mic podcast from Sticker Giant. Let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to Stickers on the Mic. Andrew, as always, a pleasure to be here today. We're dialing in Mikey Latner from ProjectCamp. Mikey, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So ProjectCamp, this is a very positive thing for kids. I want to, let you tell the story of how ProjectCamp came to be, and then we'll talk more about where you come from and what you all are doing. But just give us the lay of the land, how ProjectCamp started.
Yeah, definitely. So in ProjectCamp, we provide care for children, support for families, and resiliency for communities, really centering around providing care for children in disasters, mostly natural disasters, responding to natural disasters with free trauma-informed pop-up day camps, and then also organizing and preparing communities to be able to provide for children and families. And this came about actually because I grew up at summer camp, was a camp director for a little over a decade, and it was actually as a camp director that I responded with a group of camp directors to Hurricane Harvey in Houston in 2017. And it was really in response to closure of schools. We had a community based in Houston at the time, and we asked how we could help. And they were like, look, the school is closed, like there's a real need for childcare. And so we went down and popped up this very large day camp. And for me, it became a real eye opener of something that I had experience and a skill set in, being in this tool being used in a totally different way to be able to meet kids in their time of need, and by extension, supporting their families and their communities.
Yeah, some folks who listen to the show regularly might know, but I too was a camp director and camp counselor, and that has been a big part of my life. And that's why this story jumped out at me. But it's novel, like you said, that you're popping up and doing day camp programs, but I presume that you also are trying to, that was the first time. Now you're creating more of a business organization. How have you started carrying that mission forward and trying to scale it? And also disasters, you can never know when they're going to happen. Right?
Definitely. Well, a tidbit about that was to say, first off, there is actually a surprising amount of overlap of folks in emergency management who have camp experience. And I think that actually comes from the fact that like camp and youth spaces in general, like we are constantly updating, editing, things break, we have to fix them, the plan changes. And that's like a natural space I feel like is for me as a camp director. And so we pop up camp and understanding how camp can be an inherently supportive therapeutic vehicle. And we can talk a bit more about the ACE study, which really roots a lot of why camp works. But that's really how like the camp component of like seeing it in action, like really sort of like starts to shine through.
Interesting. So, well, yeah, let's do that. What will the studies say how camp is therapeutic? How, like, because that kind of then informs your entire mission and the plan for your business, right? So what is it about camp that is so powerful?
Exactly. So to answer your original question, like it's really the like organizing and preparation work where that really starts to come through. But we start with camp because the adverse childhood experience study, which was put on by the CDC and Kaiser from 2011, pinned together experiencing extreme events like natural disaster, but also other forms of extreme events, structural racism, poverty, all of these things that we know have long-term effects, pinning them with lifelong physical, mental, emotional effects, and how that has long-term negative outcomes. It also presented really clear-cut mechanisms for mitigating that toxic stress and ultimately helping to mitigate trauma. And a lot of that is around creating a sense of agency, building meaningful relationships. And when you start to tick down this list of like how to do that, for me, coming from a camp space, I see things that happen at camp. Camp is an inherently intentional space that's designed around kids to provide space that's unique to kids to allow them to process and to grow. And so bridging the gap between how camp has a positive impact on kids and on the staff that work there, and moving that into the disaster response space is actually a lot shorter than we think. So you can see it in our volunteers. We don't teach folks to work with kids for the first time, but we create pathways for members of their community, like teachers, camp counselors, teens and young adults with babysitting or after school care experience, to be able to do this work in a trauma-informed manner. And so we're playing with the levers and dials around this inherently like youth-centered space to make it move faster so that we can get it up and running in places where it isn't in a disaster, to really focus on the mechanisms that help to mitigate those long-term toxic stress exposures. And it's really the organizing and preparation work outside of disasters that's the soapbox that we're really standing on, to refocus disaster response away from being heavily militarized and strength-based to being something that's about caring for mental health, that's taking into account the needs of children and families. And COVID has really highlighted, I think, a big component of this. And we all saw in real time how crucial schools were and childcare are to our economies, our communities, our society. And this is an extension of that same conversation.
Totally. Yeah. So we'll circle back to the business side of things a little bit, because you've had to create a structure to operate, et cetera. There's, of course, working with kids comes with some hurdles, and, you just got to jump through those hoops, so to speak. But I want to kind of bring it to the here and now. You just are when we tried to set this up, you're in the middle of a project. So what was the project camp that was popped up in the last, and talk a little bit about the most recent experience that you all have had?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were just recently in New Mexico for the Calf Canyon Hermit's Creek fire, which is now the largest wildfire in New Mexico state history. Right. And we actually worked with New Mexico's Children, Youth, and Families Division. We worked with state and county emergency management. We actually worked with a camp outside of Santa Fe called Glorieta Adventure Camps, which at the time was housing a big portion of the evacuated population. We were able to actually set up camp there. And so folks who had been evacuated had a ready to go childcare option there. We work with kids ages 6 through 16. And so we did this one very quickly. We set up camp within about 48 hours. And so we were, on Monday putting things together and opened the doors for camp on Wednesday morning.
Wow. And so how long were you there then?
We were there. We ran for a full 2 weeks.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And that was kind of in line with when schools were closed, but also folks' ability to be able to go back to their homes. I think what is really important about what we do is that we pop up really quickly so that we can be there when people need us. And when people are able to go back home, when regular childcare opportunities like school turn back on, that's where we want kids to be. And so we can turn it off then in response to that.
Nice.
Helping to bridge the gap for communities and provide that continuity of care.
Interesting. Yeah, well, and that was a big news around here in Colorado, because we were, not impacted specifically, but it's all in the region and a lot of confluence in, southern Colorado, northern New Mexico. So it's a volunteer, you're really basing this on a lot of volunteers, but you do have a team, you have a board, there's a whole, whether it's board of directors, board of advisors. How did you come to structure this organization, and how do all these people then help this group further that mission?
Definitely. So we're we really rely on community-based volunteers for a couple of reasons. One is that they provide a level of cultural competency as being members of the community that you simply can't get by flying in staff or volunteers. And when we were working in New Mexico, we had staff from CYFD, other members of the community who in many cases knew the kids, certainly knew the area where the kids were from. And that creates a level of not just cultural competency, but empathy that you can't mimic. Folks who are also experiencing the same disaster, whether they're evacuated or not, but there's something really meaningful in that understanding. And so we prioritize bringing in local volunteers, which we background train and vet as any good youth organization. I would say for us, because we work with kids, all that for us needs to be platinum standard. We spend a good amount of time on how we train and how we vet volunteers and staff, because they're working with kids. Parents are trusting us with the thing that's actually the most important to them in a time of great upheaval. And it's important that we are able to do this right 100% of the time. As far as board, staff, advisory boards, and we have collected, I'd say we really do straddle this interesting gap space between emergency management and summer camp. We have learned to code switch between the two, and we've actually learned where there's a lot of overlap. And so our staff, our advisory boards are really experts in the field in pulling from these two areas, so that we're able to run. Sorry, that's my dog barking.
It's okay. Dogs are part of life.
Part of life. But so that we're able to really run an amazing day camp, an amazing trauma-informed day camp inside of this rapidly changing environment that is the evacuations of a natural disaster.
So, there, especially you said you're based in LA. California has quite a lot of wildfires and disasters, and again, we don't know where the next one is, but we have a pretty good idea, right? Mm-hmm. Just with the patterns of weather and seasons in America. So, I mean, you say all the planning is ready to go, so you can just sort of pop it up pretty fast. Your model works, like you said. How do you then get the word out? I mean, you got a pretty cool logo. It kind of jumps out at me. I like that. So you have some good design going, but what is then the outreach to get people to click that donate button so that you can continue? That's the growth side, I guess, and the business side of this. How does this then scale to a place where it's still a nonprofit, but it also can do more?
Yeah, I mean, so from a logistics perspective and a values-based perspective, money is not the barrier to entry. So we don't require parents to pay to send their kids to camp. We don't charge communities to have us pop up. We do a ton of fundraising from individuals, from community foundations, from local state government, prior to, during, and after disaster, to make sure that money is not the barrier to entry. And that actually really links again back to the ACE study. Each county in California has an ACE index, or an adverse childhood experience index score. And that one of the things that just shows is that ACEs tend to be higher in areas that are low income, that are rural, in our communities of color. And so if money is going to be the barrier to entry to getting work done in those high priority communities, that's where the breakdown is going to be. So us doing the fundraising ahead of time, and we really do rely on those donations to make it possible for us to do this work. It means then also our partners on the ground can be experts in the room in their community. So when we work with a school district, the school can provide us the space. They can help, grab teacher volunteers who can help work with our kids, but they can do what they do best. And we can be a pathway for them to be able to be involved. And when we were in Reno during the Calder fire last year, our friends at World Central Kitchen helped us connect to a local restaurant and paid for them to turn their catering business on to feed our campers and our staff. It was 100 meals a day for 2 weeks. It created a way for that restaurant, a member of the community, to be part of the solution to support those children, by extension, the family and the communities. And so that's really how we envision camp in a much larger sense, is that we can be this pathway for community to be involved in this very specific way. Nice.
Yeah, no, we've done some World Kitchen stuff too here. So that's cool. And they're always in all these disasters in the last few years, pretty high profile, which is cool.
Definitely.
Back to sort of the ongoing thing, like you said, there are some of these indicators off this study, for instance, that are not tied to disasters. They're just tied to everyday life. They're tied to the institutions that have shaped America into what it is, for better or for worse. So you are then able to go into communities that could use a camp for kids for a certain time period. It doesn't have to be tied to a disaster, is what you're saying too.
For us, we really do focus on disaster, but I think what you were highlighting really is kind of the crux of it. It allows us to be experts in the room on what we do, but we are highlighting a problem that we already know exists on a much larger level. There already is a dearth of childcare options. There's a dearth of investment in childcare. There's a dearth of investment in childcare providers, to be very explicit, on salaries paid to those who work in that part of our care economy and education. Right. In a lot of spaces, we are the first summer camp that kids have ever seen. Right. And our hope is to work with organizations, work with local camps, the American Camp Association, to be able to help make that not so, to be able to provide space for kids to be able to go to camp after we've gone, once they've had this experience. But it does highlight how all of that lack of investment, the need for us to focus on and invest in childcare and in education and in the folks that do that work.
Nice. Yeah. So, you've been doing this for about 4 years now, roughly. It looks like you guys started about in 2018, right? So it was before the pandemic, right? Like a lot of recent stories I've had, it's a lot of pandemic era people.
Fair. Yeah,
but
totally.
you have been doing this for, 10 plus years. And what in the last 4 years, though, especially, I think there's always been the campsite, and that is really special. And I have a lot of nostalgia myself, especially as we kick off into summer. And I think about the lessons.
Part of being coming from camp, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and you think about all the lessons, and there's a lot of those, initiative and self-confidence and aptitude or whatever it is that you can instill in kids. Maybe it's a specific skill. I learned how to shoot an arrow, or I learned how to row a boat, whatever. This is kind of less around that summer camp gauziness of it. It's very specific. But how, in 4 years, how have you, well, if you could go back 4 years ago and say, all right, this is where we're going to end up with this, what would that look like? You know what I mean?
I think one thing that was a consistent through line from then until now, that I think I even underestimated was how, we really rely on like what the core of camp is, and that like really intentional space. So we don't have archery, and we don't have a pool. We don't have a ropes course. We do a lot of the things that like you teach teens and young adults who are working at camp for the first time to be able to do with kids. It's a lot of like how to facilitate small groups, how to lead games, how to think on your feet. We play a ton of Duck, Duck, Goose and Foursquare and Gaga Ball, and it's a lot of sidewalk chalk, and we're out running around. And there's like, that is really like the core of where it is. This in the disaster response space, I will say, this I didn't expect as much. There is a lot of donating stuff.
Yeah.
And our equipment needs are, like I said, kind of minor. We can run a great game of Foursquare with some like blue tape on the ground or some sidewalk chalk and a playground ball. And you'd be surprised how occupied you can keep kids in that kind of space, and how much money you can have with that.
Just in the driveway, they love it, right? Yeah. Like it doesn't matter. So I guess that's kind of what I was getting at in a really roundabout way. There's like this physical place of a camp that a lot of people have their nostalgia for, but really the lasting things is that interior life that you can instill into kids in a way that is not a skill, like a hard skill of tying a knot or climbing a wall, but there's this like this interpersonal soft skill.
It all comes from time. Yeah, it's all time spent. And I think that's the thing that we really focus on, is that like we're providing a space where people are intentionally spending time with kids at this really difficult time. And it helps give them an outlet and connection to friends and a language around what's happening. We have, one of the things we do is we call it a meat check, the mental emotional check. It's actually a really simple 1 to 10 scale, but it allows kids to self-assess and allows them to talk about what's happening around them, the things that they're hearing in real time, in a way that's not judgmental, that's not meant to like force them to share, but that's really meant to create just like space for kids to be able to express. I think we sometimes underestimate like how much, especially little kids, are hearing what's going on and thinking and processing what's happening, especially in this disaster space. Like they are absorbing all of it, and they can articulate all of it in their own ways, but like they can articulate all of it. And so we are providing space for that to like, we're providing two kinds of spaces. One is a space for parents to be able to do what they need to do and be supported with childcare. And another is a space for kids to be able to share with other kids and with us how they're seeing and experiencing what's going on around them. And I think I understood at the beginning of this, that is like a kind of thing that camp does. And that's what draws me to it. And I was very pleasantly surprised, like how quickly a 6-year-old can, or, an 8, 10, 12, like how quickly a kid can understand that and get there. And it's because they recognize that space. That's like, I think that's one of the really important pieces about creating a space that's unique to kids, is that it allows them to thrive because they know how this operates. They know we go to activities, we go in a group. They know that like there are regular intervals. They know we have check-in at the beginning of the day, and that they'll see their parents later on at the end of the day. That sense of safety and routine is inherently like starts to lower the amount of stress that our kids are feeling in these moments.
Yeah, the director, when I was growing up and going through the program of leadership training, it was always, structure leads to freedom, right? That was the mantra. And I try to still honor that with my kids a little bit. It's tough. It's tough when you're a parent, but, even as a teacher myself, that structure, as soon as they're safe and they feel like they can succeed, then they have the freedom to do that. And that's pretty positive. My last thing, sort of, thinking about the kids and the volunteers, especially when you're dealing with trauma, there's that baggage that you bring into it, but then there's the sort of the baggage you take out, what you carry with you, right? How is it for you and for the people you're working with to that processing too? Because you don't get to stay and be with these people forever, and that there will be lasting effects. How do you sort of manage all of that and the expectations for people too? That seems really hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple of ways. One is that we're trauma informed. We're not mental health care professionals, but we're training folks who work with kids to be able to understand and to do this work in a trauma informed way in this environment. And so part of what we're doing is, going back to the ACE study, is helping to lower the risk and mitigate what sticks around, those long-term effects. Part of it is also being able to focus on the good. We focus on the positivity of the day, and that's a lot of what camp is. Like, camp is a fun space. Kids have to learn to be kids in this way that's it's different. It's not like school where they have a specific kind of work. Their work at camp is to be a kid. Part of it also is linking up to community resources that are going to be there long term. It's connecting with Boys and Girls Club and with mental health professionals in the area that we can plug in that are doing that long term recovery work. I think that's where we really see ourselves as outsiders in a community, being supportive to the community. Like in New Mexico, we were able to connect with a couple of child therapists in the area to be able to connect them with some of the parents of kids we wanted to keep an eye on, to be able to work with the Santa Fe Children's Museum and some other youth serving organizations in the area to be able to do work not just at camp in this acute environment, but knowing that our group exists and knowing that those kids are going to need those resources long term. That's where we're really tapping into and elevating. And I think that's where the investment needs to happen in the community-based organizations that are doing that. They're holding up children and helping our children grow prior to disaster. They're going to be there during, and they're going to be there afterwards also. That's where we need to focus.
Right. That's amazing. Love some of these quotes from the parents on your site. It's really motivating and inspiring. And hopefully that folks who are listening to this, you check out projectcamp.co.co. They are, of course, on all the socials. Mikey, we really appreciate what you're doing. We appreciate, the stickers that you're handing out and sharing with everybody too. That's really amazing. But I love to see the kids and the parents, getting a sense of stability and also positivity in what clearly is a very difficult time. So we thank you for that.
I really appreciate that. It's a lot of fun, meaningful work.
I can imagine. We'll keep doing the good work. Everybody out there in podcast land, thank you for checking in. As always, please check out projectcamp.co and try to do anything you can in your community. That's always very important. We say on the show, every sticker has a story. Today's story, of course, is Project Camp. Like Mikey, again, thank you so much for joining us. And
thanks, Andrew.
I hope the summer is productive, eventful, but in a way that is also hopefully safe for everybody involved, right? So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That wraps up this episode of Stickers on the Mic, brought to you by StickerGiant.com. You can download us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcatcher. Thanks again for listening to Stickers on the Mic. We'll see you next time.